Well, several of you have said things that I think pretty well preempt some of the ideas that we've been discussing a bit around developing a strategic framework. But what we're trying to do here is, as you can see in this panel, helping the FAA to develop its training and technical assistance activities in ways that will enhance the things they're doing. And of course, we're going to be very interested in dealing with the application of technology and also dealing with the issues of infrastructure. And we're excited to hear some of the sessions or some of the projects that are working with international activities. And so one of the things we're hoping to do is to invigorate, if you will, the FAA system to function in ways that are somewhat different, certainly pay attention to its traditions and experience, but also hopefully integrate many of the things that you're doing research on so that it will enhance the functioning of the National Air System. And one of the things that we're going to be working on, and our hope is that you will indeed be part of this process to help us develop an effective kind of integration. And we hope to create a mission statement that will indeed identify projects that could appropriately work together to create some high priority research that will add to the FAA's strategic vision. The people who will be working on this, you've already met in part. Certainly Mark will be doing a lot of the work in this project, and many of you are aware of Mark's background, but he has been in higher education over 40 years and has developed a number of programs in a variety of agencies, as you can see on this panel, including the FAA, the Coast Guard, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. So it brings to that project, I think, a good deal of strength in terms of developing that sort of strategic approach and strategic vision. Probably the weak link in this is me, but I'll be helping Mark to deal with these issues and have had a bit of experience, in fact, in overseeing the program for ATIS for about 20 years in the FAA, and was excited to hear, for example, earlier some of the comments of the international research, because it was during that time that we also helped the FAA with Partnership 21 in developing international linkages. So whether it's putting in new technology, whether it's putting in new approaches, whether it's utilizing the cooperation with international partners, I think that the things that you're doing will indeed help us to effectively develop and deliver, if you will, the kind of products that we hope will be helpful to the FAA. The third person that will be working with us on this project is Dr. Scott Terry. And Dr. Terry comes to us from the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and he was here at the beginning. Unfortunately, he's become quite ill, so he hasn't been able to be at the sessions. But Dr. Terry brings a lot of experience in strategic planning to the enterprise. He has worked for a long time in developing the Aviation Institute at University of Nebraska, Omaha, but additionally has been in charge of their NASA space grant and has also been the leader on their campus and actually for the state of Nebraska in the EPSCoR activities. And so he's had a lot of experience in developing strategic models that bring together various research aspects. So I think between the three of us and an array of very good consultants and partners, we're going to be able, I think, to do a job of integrating some of your research. And so our hope will be that we can indeed develop processes and procedures where we can capture that research at various stages and then help to develop the model that will integrate that into the system. And I'll come back and talk a bit about that in a moment, as will Mark. But our hope is that in part, we can lean on the work that's been done by the COE Commercial Space Transportation program and try and use that as an exemplary model, and some of you have seen their materials already, and think about how what they've done is effective and how we might emulate that in bringing together that, that kind of research integration that we're looking for. Yesterday we had an opportunity, and some of you, particularly those of you in industry, worked with us in trying to brainstorm what are some things that we ought to be doing. And in many ways, Todd's comments earlier sort of preempted some of the things we discussed that I was going to bring here, but also I think those of you that were in that session, we appreciated very much the kind of brainstorming that you did to help us in thinking this through. One of the things that I think is very critical and we'll be working on in this project as we develop a roadmap of how we deliver the results is how we might better integrate and coordinate the various research projects. So that'll be, I think, one of the things that came out of our session that we will certainly be looking at. I think it was interesting yesterday that we suggested we ought to have just a quick first step. And again, Mark will be talking about this in a moment, but Carol and Fred, I think, suggested that the commercial space program has already developed a telecom format for sharing information. And we're going to borrow that format and have a monthly telecom where we can have, I understand from Carol and Fred, up to 1,000 people involved, and open it up to everyone, to all of the shareholders, to the researchers, to the academic departments, to the institutions, and hopefully to our FAA colleagues, to be able to discuss what's going on. And we'd like to have you help us to identify the kinds of topics we might focus on, but also to provide a vehicle so that we might then integrate many of the findings that you're having at different stages. And so that's going to be critical. As soon as we get that system set up, we'll let everyone in the room, and certainly everyone engaged in the projects, to know how to get on, how to help build the agendas, and how to participate. And so we won't make those very long. They'll be perhaps about an hour. People could come in. We'll focus on different things that the different projects are working on. But what we will also do is provide additional opportunities for people to post some of the things that they're doing. So hopefully, Todd, that's one of the things we can do to help with that. And as many of you said, one of the exciting things for us also about this event is the energy and the networking that seems to have occurred. And we do want to capture that and continue it as we move forward. While she's not in the room, I've chatted with Karen, and we certainly talked with Abby yesterday, and we're going to ask them to be our advocates with the FAA leadership, because one of the things we want to do is continue to communicate the excitement that we have in our projects, but also try and keep them engaged so that they know what we're doing. Because I think that's going to be critical, that they continue to understand that this essentially becomes a crucible where we can provide data and ideas that will indeed help the system. So I hope that as we talk with our FAA partners, our sponsors, and certainly Abby and Karen, that we can continue to get them to talk about the fact that this group of people is coming up with ideas that will help make the system better. The other thing that we talked about yesterday, which extends some of the things that we've already talked about and some of the other strategic approaches that we're going to be taking in this project, is to also think about how we might look at ways that we can help as we find these results to get them to the field. As we've heard about people talking about their projects, it's very critical that we do surveys. It's critical that we do interviews. It's critical that we integrate the information and the language that people are using in the FAA. But in one way, it's sort of the on-ramp. Our research is a way of getting to the start of that. What we want to do is perhaps think about, are there some ways of building in at the beginning, not the full answer, but building in at the beginning ways that we can think about an implementation phase. We've talked a lot, and we talked about it yesterday, is that it's very easy at times to create research that sits on the shelf. And so what we need to do is think through, and this project hopefully will help initiate that for all of us, is think through how do we take the research we have as we build that research and as we find and as we develop our findings, how can that be implemented? And by building in that idea at the beginning, hopefully we can essentially work with each of you to talk about how would that be an implementation phase once your research is completed. And yesterday we brainstormed a few ideas that I thought were useful. One of the things that Abby talked about is we need to reach out to our FAA partners, certainly our sponsors, but also the units that we're working with to see if there are volunteers as we go along in our research, not only to help us with their survey information, but also to help think about, how might we implement? We talked about the idea, are there units out there that can serve as test beds for the kind of research that you're doing, so that once you've gotten your results, that can be implemented in small pieces to see if it makes a difference. And I think Jeff was the one that gave me this idea that there are a number of unit managers in the FAA that may be interested in being that tryout phase. So this is perhaps a bit ambitious, and it certainly reflects my perceptions. But one of the things I'm going to try and do is talk about how do we get each of you to feed in what you're doing during your research so that it can indeed then be thought about in terms of how implementation might occur. Mark?
Okay, Jim's got a lot of great ideas, doesn't he? I'll tell you what. These are the current research focus areas that the FAA is looking at. And I think as we look at these, a lot of times we have more questions than we do answers. Questions about where are our priorities, where do we go inside these things and so on, what are we looking for, what are we trying to accomplish? And we're looking for direction in a lot of different areas. One of the things we understand, one of the things we realize is that we have a lot of strong members here, a lot of strong university members, and there's a lot of brain power in this room. I mean, we could tell this morning, there are a lot of good ideas. People have put a lot of thought into what they're doing and where they're going. And we also have a lot of strong industry team members as well. And the question comes up, I mean, where do we want to be a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, and so on? What is it that we're trying to accomplish? And what are some of the good ideas that we have? Of course, we also have people from the FAA, the federal government, which they're involved as well. And of course, they want those ideas from us, and they have a lot of good ideas themselves. So what we're going to try to do is select some representatives from each of the groups, those three groups, the FAA, probably the management side of the FAA primarily, also the industry groups and the university groups. We're going to survey those group members to determine what their priorities are, what their perceptions might be of some of the key issues in each category. And once we do that, we're going to assimilate these responses, and we're going to send it back out, kind of use a little Delphi technique there, until we get some sort of agreement of what we're looking for. But once we have that semi-agreement, then we're going to ask some representatives from each of the different groups to sit in on a teleconference or two. We're going to take the information that we have, we're going to look at that information, we're going to discuss it, and then see where we can go from there. Now, as we're doing that, as we're looking for future direction, we also have a lot of good ideas that are coming up now. People are saying, hey, you know, we maybe want to take a look at this, or we want to take a look at that. And possibly there's some funding out there for this idea. Now, what we're suggesting is, and what we'd like for you to do, if you've got some good ideas like that, what we'd like to see is maybe a 1 or 2 page white paper. Keep it very simple, very short, and say, hey, here's a concept that we would like to pursue. Submit that to either Jim or to me, and this will go through a vetting process and eventually make its way to the FAA through Karen. And she'll shop it around at the FAA and see if there's an interest there, see if there's an interest in sponsorship with that. So as these new ideas come along, as you get these bright ideas, please don't keep them to yourselves, but try to get those to us, and we'll go with that. If, in fact, she's able to identify a sponsor, then we'll come back and you can look for team members, you can look for other people that want to help you from both industry as well as other universities, and we can move forward that way. Yes?
To elaborate, Mark, that's such a great idea, because I've seen that happen in previous centers of excellence. One way to even have more successful white papers is if those in academia and in industry actually partner with an FAA tech monitor. That may not be the tech monitor right away, but the relationship with the FAA to co-develop that white paper, so it doesn't come across as, here, we in academia are submitting a proposal to you. This has already been mutually discussed, and it sets the process ahead much more quickly.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Seth. That's good. Okay. So where do we go from here? We will have the monthly meetings, as Jim suggested. We'll plan on a workshop in Daytona Beach, March 1st and 2nd, and we'll work to develop these areas and look at priorities and so on. And as you get these ideas, please, like I say, get them in and certainly communicate among yourselves, among members of the FAA. It will be extremely helpful. Does anybody have any other questions, comments on that? Okay. Thank you.